Clara Hensley found the first letter on a Tuesday in March, 6 months after her mother died. She was reshelving grief books in the 150s, moving mechanically through a task she'd done 10,000 times, when a scrap of paper fluttered from the year of magical thinking. She almost threw it away. Then she read it. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. E.L. Clara stood in the aisle with the book in one hand and the note in the other. She had whispered that verse at her mother's bedside, the night before the end, not sure if she was comforting her mother or herself. She put the note in her pocket. Coincidence. A patron's bookmark. Nothing more. The second letter came 2 weeks later. She grabbed a novel for her lunch break, something she'd read before, reliable and distant. Inside was another scrap. Your mother knew you loved her. That was enough. E.L. Clara's hand shook. She had not spoken those words aloud, not to anyone, but she had thought them in the dark at 3 a.m., wondering if her mother had been scared, if she had done enough, if the prayers she muttered through the morphine haze had reached anything. She checked the checkout history. The book hadn't been borrowed in 8 months. The third letter appeared in a book on prayer she hadn't opened in years. She only pulled it because a patron asked about it, and Clara couldn't remember the call number. The note was tucked in the chapter on lament. God listens in the dark too. E.L. Clara sat at her reference desk and cried for the first time since the funeral. She didn't know who E.L. was. She didn't know how they knew. She only knew that 3 times, in 3 books, she had found words that addressed something she had prayed without believing anyone heard. She started watching. Not obviously, not desperately, just an extra awareness as she walked the stacks in the mornings. The library was nearly empty before 10, a few retirees, the occasional homeless man seeking warmth, the Thursday knitting circle in the community room. Clara knew them by sight, by habit, by the books they borrowed. She didn't know anyone with the initials E.L. She prayed differently now. Still angry, still uncertain, but directed outward again. Who is writing these? She asked the ceiling of the 200s aisle. Are you doing this? Is this how you work now, scraps of paper and library books? She didn't expect an answer. She asked anyway. The fourth letter came in a book she was holding when she whispered a prayer she didn't know she was praying. She had stopped in the 800s poetry section, thinking of her mother's favorite Dickinson. She said, barely audible, I don't know how to do this without her. She pulled down a collection at random. Inside, you are not doing it without her. She prepared you. E.L. Clara dropped the book. She had not told anyone about the letters. She had not written the prayer down, spoken it to a friend, posted it online. She had whispered it in an empty aisle 30 seconds ago. The impossibility of it sat on her chest like a physical weight. Someone was watching, or something was listening. She found Esther Lang collapsed in the mystery aisle on a Thursday morning. The old woman was slumped against the shelf, breathing hard, one side of her face slack. Clara called 911, held her hand, talked nonsense about large print Agatha Christie's until the paramedics came. As they lifted her, Esther gripped Clara's wrist with surprising strength. The letters, Esther whispered. I wrote them for my Margaret. I didn't know you were reading. Clara froze. E.L. Esther Lang. The Knitting Circle. The Large Print Mysteries. She had helped this woman find the body in the library last month. I don't understand, Clara said. How did you know? Esther's eyes were closing, the stroke pulling her under. I didn't. I just wrote. Someone always needs them. In the hospital waiting room, Clara pieced it together. Esther's daughter Margaret, dead 30 years. Esther's husband Henry, dead 2 years ago. The letters started again after his death, written to no one, left in books because Esther couldn't bear to throw them away and couldn't mail them to the dead. She came to the library every Thursday. She wrote in the mornings, before the knitting circle, sitting in the same carrel by the window. She never watched Clara. She never knew about Clara's mother, her prayers, her 3 a.m. doubts. The specificity was impossible. And yet, Clara sat with Esther when she woke. The old woman was weak, half her face still wrong, but her eyes were clear. "I stopped believing God listened after Margaret died," Esther said. "I wrote the letters to pretend someone did. Then I found one, years later, in a book I'd never touched. Someone had added to it. A response. I realized maybe it wasn't about who wrote first. Maybe it was about keeping the conversation going." "Who added to yours?" Clara asked. "I never found out. But I kept writing. And I kept finding answers in different handwriting, different books. Not always. Just enough." Clara stayed until Esther slept. Then she walked to the hospital chapel, a small room she hadn't noticed in 6 months of visiting her mother in this same building. She sat in the last row of 3 chairs and spoke aloud, for the first time since the funeral, a real prayer, not whispered, not automatic. "God, I don't know if you're placing these letters or if you're just not stopping them. I don't know if Esther is your instrument or if we're both desperate people making meaning out of accident. But I asked, and something answered. That's more than I had. That's enough for now." She didn't feel different. The room didn't glow. But she kept talking, naming her mother, her fear, her anger, her unexpected gratitude for scraps of paper and books. When she finished, she sat in the silence and listened, not expecting a voice, just present in the quiet for the first time in months. Esther moved to assisted living in May. Clara visited weekly, brought large print mysteries, read aloud when Esther's eyes tired. They never discussed the letters directly again. They didn't need to. In June, Clara wrote her first note. She didn't know who would find it. She chose a grief book she'd reshelved 100 times, one that had helped her mother. She wrote, "The pain means it mattered. CH." She tucked it in the chapter on anger and walked away. She wrote another in July in a book on prayer. "Keep asking. Someone is listening. CH." By August, she had written 12. She found one response, different handwriting, in a novel about mothers and daughters. "Thank you, M." She wept in the 800s aisle, not from sadness, and kept walking. She prayed now in the stacks, out loud, louder than before, not caring if patrons heard. She asked God direct questions. She accused him of absence. She thanked him for Esther, for coincidence or design, for the possibility that faith might be a conversation carried on in scraps and silence, passed hand to hand across years and deaths, until someone who needed it found the right page at the right time. On the anniversary of her mother's death, Clara found a letter in a book she had never touched, a collection of Rilke she didn't remember shelving. The handwriting was Esther's, shaky now, but unmistakable. The letters continue after us. So does the love. E.L. Clara held it to her chest and whispered, "Thank you," to the God she was still learning to believe in, the God of library stacks and hospital chapels and impossible timing, the God who answered in ways she couldn't explain and didn't need to. She wrote her own note on the back of Esther's scrap, tucked it in a book on grace, and went back to work. We spend so much of our lives looking for God to answer our prayers in big, unmistakable ways. We wait for miracles, for signs in the sky, or for a voice from heaven. But more often than not, God chooses to work through ordinary people with willing hearts. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 1:3-4, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Did you catch that? God comforts us, so that we can comfort someone else. Esther didn't know Clara. Clara didn't know who would read her notes. Yet God used their willingness to encourage others, one small message at a time. Sometimes the answer to someone's prayer isn't a miracle that falls from the sky. Sometimes it's a person who chooses to speak hope, show kindness, or simply remind someone they are not alone. You may never know whose life is changed by a simple phone call, a handwritten note, an encouraging word, or a quiet prayer. But God knows. So don't underestimate the little things. The smallest act of kindness, placed in God's hands, can become an answer to a prayer you'll never hear. And if today, you're the one waiting for an answer, don't lose heart. God often works in ways we don't expect, and through people we would never imagine. Until next time, remember, even the smallest seed of encouragement can grow into something eternal.